Hereditary is written and directed by Ari Aster. It is a feature film debut, and it stars Toni, Collette, Gabriel, Byrne, Shapiro, and Alex Wolff. The way the film has been marketed and the synopsis that you can find on IMDb, for example, it's sort of being very purposefully vague as to what it is. And in that respect, even though I generally don't really care about spoilers, because I feel that if you want to have a real sort of analysis or a real discussion, then you have to really not care about what to reveal and what not to reveal. But because the film is going so out of its way to kind of hide even elements that are in the first act, which movie trailers don't generally do, I'm just going to give like a quick overview that is totally outside of anything that could be plot related, and then I'm going to do a just like more normal review where I'm going to probably reveal some plot things, not too much, but I mean, if you don't want it spoiled for yourself, then you could just skip at that moment. So, you know, buyer beware. So, just in case you really haven't seen the movie and you don't want to know anything about it, I like the movie. I like the movie quite a bit. I think there's some really neat filmmaking in there. The atmosphere is appropriately dreary and oppressive, and I know atmosphere is kind of a bullshit word in the sense that it's kind of hard to quantify. It is this intangible merging of directing, of acting, of imagery, of sound that transcends the sum of its parts to create something really powerful. All the great horror films have a ton of atmosphere. Scratch that, all the great films have atmosphere, and I really can't explain what it is, but I think this film really does have atmosphere in spades, so it really has that going for it. If you like slow burns and films that are as much about character introspection and drama as they are about horror, then I think you'll like it, or at least you're inclined to like it. But if you enjoy the more bombastic, James Wan, It, The Conjuring style of horror film, then you really probably won't get all that much out of it, or at least be warned, it's not that kind of film. On the other hand, if your favorite horror films are things like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist, or if you really like The Wailing that came out a couple years back, I think you'll get a lot out of the film. At least it's going to be up your alley for sure. Hereditary is a film about destiny, about fate, about having one's life out of one's control, out of one's hands. Toni Collette's character is an artist. She builds little miniature sets and little miniature people. She uses real life people and real life locations as her inspiration, and it's almost as if by crafting these and by crafting her own scenes, she herself is trying to regain control over a life with which she really doesn't feel like she has that much control. Later on, we'll learn that through this weird dreamlike sequence where she talks to her son. She didn't want to have her son. She wanted to have a miscarriage. She wanted to force a miscarriage and basically an abortion. And despite the fact that she tried everything she could, her eldest son, Peter, played by Alex Wolff, still managed to survive and was born. The film bookends this sort of sentiment by having the first and last shot be this sort of composite between real live-action filmmaking and use of miniature. The opening shot is extremely evocative. It starts out looking through a window in the garden, and the camera slowly pans away from the window and across this room, and then slowly pushes into this little dollhouse, into the room of this dollhouse, and then seamlessly transitions into the real world, I was going to say, but let's say the story, and that room, which is the exact room that Alex Wolff's character is sleeping in. In my mind, it really reminded me of those old Disney animated films, like I'm pretty sure Robin Hood and maybe The Jungle Book or Sword and Sorcerer do things like this, where they open on the image of a book. It opens and you see writing, and as there's a narrator that's telling you the beginning of the story, it slowly dissolves into the story, and you get the feeling that this is a legend, that this is a fable, that this is a fairy tale. And the film right off the bat is sort of telling you that that it's like an adult legend, an adult myth, an adult fairy tale. Aster is really immediately calling out on the artificiality of the story and sort of comparing his characters to the little doll-like characters that Toni Collette is recreating. Whenever you see a camera movement that moves sort of independently of any character, it sort of makes it feels like this camera is a omniscient, powerful being, and that there's somebody behind it that is manipulating the narrative and manipulating the story. Almost as if the gods themselves were interfering within the fate of these mortals. And I mention this specifically because in Peter's high school classroom they are discussing the myth of Iphigenia, who was the daughter of Agamemnon and was sacrificed to Artemis, I believe, in order for Agamemnon to be able to sail to Troy and have favorable winds. There's a debate within the classroom as to whether it is more or less tragic if a character's fate is preordained and thus has no say over his downfall, or if it is more or less tragic if his downfall is caused by his own free will and his own character flaws. There was another film very recently that used this exact Greek story as the sort of template for its theme and for its plot, and that was Yorgos Lanthimos' The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which came out a few months earlier and was actually distributed by A24 as well. And certainly in both films, you can feel the weight of fate and destiny crushing down on the characters' lives. But whereas The Killing of a Sacred Deer sort of stays within its allegory, disguised under the veneer of a Cannes-like art film, Hereditary devolves unabashedly into genre territory and into a subgenre of satanic, occult films that feeds off of things like, specifically Rosemary's Baby, I think would be the big reference, but I also got vibes of John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, even The Wailing a little bit. I think it's fair to say that for a debut, this is an incredibly confident first film by Ari Aster, whether it be in the direction or in the slow and very deliberate camera movements that are never showy. You can really tell that this guy really understands all the tools, or most of the tools, that are at his disposal to tell stories. Two of the things that I was the most impressed with were his use of transitions and of off-screen. In terms of transitions, there's really some beautifully utilized dissolves that you don't really see all that much, and also, when he needs to, really very well realized snap cuts. It definitely feels like a movie that was prepped and shot with the transitions in mind, and that's something you really don't see a lot of in first-time filmmakers. But it really helps to sort of merge the film together into a cohesive whole and really works beautifully. And then if you really need to illustrate what can be done with the power of off-screen and off-screen sound, there's a scene in there that just does it beautifully. And if you've seen the film, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a scene that I think is talked about a lot in other reviews, and really it deserves it because it's really expertly crafted and just shows that this guy, he really understands what he's doing. And like I said, it's a very impressive first film, and I'm really curious to see what he does next. Now, a reason this film also got a lot of press was in the discrepancies that it had between the critic reviews, which were extremely positive, and the audience reviews, which were generally mixed to middling. A lot of reports of people walking out, of people laughing at scenes that are not supposed to be comedic. Horror films really have inherently like a huge market. There's a very large audience for them, but within that large audience, there's sort of a lot of different subsections because horror films can be so varied. And I often use the comparison of wine when it comes to films because I'm really into wine, and I used this on Reddit a couple days ago. If you do a blind taste test, and these have been done many times, with a general audience, like just not wine enthusiasts, not sommeliers, but really just regular normal people, and you give them a 10, 15 bottle of Cabernet and a 25-year-old, you know, really expensive bottle of Bordeaux, almost unmistakably, every single time, people will rate the cheaper bottle higher than the more expensive one. And the reason for that is that the cheaper Cabernet will have fruitier, sweeter notes, which are things that people, A, are used to, and B, that's generally what they're looking for. It's easy, it goes down smoothly, and, you know, you're not really thinking about it all that much. The Bordeaux, on the other hand, because of its age and because of the way it's made, it'll have hints of tobacco, of leather, it'll have earthy tones, you know, old wood, all these things that most people actually don't enjoy. Now, that isn't to say you can't get a really good bottle of cheap wine and that there isn't a place for it and that those people are wrong for liking it. And that also doesn't mean that every expensive bottle of wine will be delicious. Some of them go bad, and also some of them are just not to your taste. But with film, it's kind of similar in that you have a very large audience of people that like a certain thing, and they like things that are easy and palatable and sweeter, I guess. And on the other hand, you have really like very enthusiastic, avid filmgoers that try to go for something that is less obvious, that they see with less frequency. And that's not to say that this film is only for super film literate, you know, smart people, because I don't think it is, actually. It's not as inaccessible and as out there as maybe some people say it is. But A24 definitely knew what they were doing. They put it out on a large scale. They put it out in a lot of theaters, and I think they were perfectly aware of the reception that this film was going to get by a general audience. And I don't think they cared. I think they wanted to make their money back. They wanted to make as much money as they could, and honestly, more power to them. I mean, for me, that's what marketing is all about. It's about selling people on things they don't really want. And, you know, they didn't like it. Some people didn't like it. You know, that's what movies are about. That's what makes art and movies and wine, frankly, interesting, is that you never really know what you're going to get. You go in and maybe you like it, maybe you don't, maybe it's what you expected, maybe it's better, maybe it's not as good, maybe it's horrible to you, but if you really always know what to expect and are fed exactly that, then I really don't understand the point of going to the movies anymore. And you know, if somebody came in expecting It or The Conjuring and this movie really wasn't what he expected but still liked it, and maybe found a new subgenre of horror that he could really latch on to, and maybe went online and said, oh, this movie is borrowing from Rosemary's Baby, or from, you know, Don't Look Now by Nicholas Roeg. I know the director referenced that movie in several interviews, and he goes and sees those films, and that's, you know, even if there's one person that is turned on to a different kind of filmmaking because of a movie like this, and he was maybe sold a false bill of goods, well, I think that's a great thing. So as always, thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, feel free to hit the like button, and if you're not subscribed, it would be awesome if you did. Again, thanks for watching, and until next time, see ya.
What is this, courtesy class? Fuck the machine, fuck the machine.
Please call the software piracy hotline.
Fuck the machine.